Hello, 9 to 5ers. I'm Elizabeth Ajadi, back with another episode for the podcast 9 to 5 and everything in between. Today, we're going to be talking about mastering the brand within, pretty much talking about personal branding, why it's important to you, and why it's important for your career. Your personal brand can help you better manage your professional development, your career, your network, and general well being. One study through Adobe found that 74% of Americans are more likely to trust someone with an established personal brand. With so many options available to potential clients, your personal brand can help you stand out to your audience. With that said, I'm not a subject matter expert on personal branding, but we have Oyin Oludipe, who is a subject matter expert and a master of branding. Oyin Oludipe is a content lead and creative director who has led ensembles of young creative minstrels at BBDO, The Hook, GT Code, that's Omni Options, and now Check. His works, some of which include commercially compelling campaigns for Google, Guinness, Visa, Premier Cool, Jumia, have been recognized by the Andes, New York Festival's Advertising Awards, the Lories, Luisa's Archive, Cannes Lion Great Ads for Good, Lagos Advertising and Ideas Festival Awards. Oyin received the Christopher Okigbo Prize for Poetry in 2016. He holds a first-class bachelor's degree in mass communication from Bangkok University, where he was the best graduating student. While I've read all of that, it's establishing that our guest speaker today is a subject matter expert on what we're going to talk about. But I've not done a great job of that, and I think I would like our speaker to introduce himself in his own words and help the listeners connect better with him. Welcome to the podcast, Oyin.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. And I think you did a great job, actually. There's hardly anything I would say now that wouldn't fall within the ambit of that. But for context, I'd just like to say that I'm somebody who loves the art of expression. I've always loved expressing myself since I was a kid. And that expressiveness, I figured I had to, harness as a career. At some point, it's like there isn't anybody who was going to tell me to do anything for a living that was going to be entirely divorced from who I was internally. So I'm a fan of expression in different forms, and that has taken me into communications. It's taken me into the field of marketing, the field of branding, which are all on one and all on the same. Whether it's marketing, branding, content creation, whether it's literature, poetry, it's all one and the same. It's all about making impressions, creating lasting impressions, and creating meaning, for messages, for ideas, for people, for products. And that is what I've been doing for the past, say, close to 10 years. I've worked at large and small advertising agencies, started my career at Fear Communications here in Lagos, one of the top tier agencies. There, I moved into the conglomerate BBDO, Worldwide Advertising Agency, one of the largest and most awarded. I worked in the West African office right here at Victoria Island, Lagos. It was there that my life changed in terms of work because I got to interact with international players, worked with a lot of European creative directors on brands like Orbit, for instance, the chewing gum.
Wow.
Worked on the Dubai tourism campaigns, worked on Google most especially.
Okay.
Very memorable, brand. Worked
For sure.
worked for very extremely, demanding, accounts. Yeah. So from there, I segued from advertising into corporate communications, enter Guarantee Trust holding company, where I wanted to work with the brand single-mindedly and, sort of impact an identified sector from within. So I worked at head office of Guarantee Trust holding at Lagos. And then from corporate communications, I then segued into growth marketing at Check, where I'm currently content lead. Again, it's all one and the same. It's having to communicate, express for brands, for platforms through different forms. Yeah. So, and I enjoy doing that.
Yeah, I really love how you defined it, creating lasting impression and meaning. And you capped it off with saying it's the art of expression. And I've always thought about communications in that sense. I also studied mass communication. I studied at Bowen University, and then I moved here and continued with what they call promotional communication. So very much corporate communication, marketing, PR. It's communication at the heart of it, but you're approaching it from different angles, whether it's digital, whether it's print, whether it's written. And so I definitely like what you said there, the art of expression. We obviously know that you're a master at personal branding and communication and expression, obviously, by all the campaigns that you've run and different campaigns. So, actually, I think I would want to provide links to our listeners so that they can go see some of these campaigns. So, if you don't mind providing them, that would be helpful
No
to
problem.
share. But I want to talk about, personal branding and expression. Why do you think personal branding is important in today's world?
I'll try to be very matter of fact.
Okay.
When I hear you ask that question, the first thing that came into
Hmm.
my head was, and I'm a Nigerian, by the way, like,
Yeah,
for the listeners,
we're
yeah.
both
So I'm going
Nigerian.
to, we're both, I mean, I'm talking to the listeners, your audience, and I'm sure they are, cross
Yeah.
geographical. So
Yes.
for those who
Yes.
aren't Nigerian listeners, I'm a Nigerian, and there's something in Nigeria, we say nobody sent you. What that basically means is, you know, in the theater of life or in the market of life, let's use the marketplace of life, nobody really owes you anything. People
Hmm.
only offer to you something after you've exchanged value with them. So it's like nobody just, wakes up in the morning and hands you a job. Nobody wakes up in the morning and recommends you in a boardroom. Nobody just wakes up in the morning and dials you for a collaboration. People only do that when you've been able to create an impression. Like, again, back to impression. Yeah. So it's like impression is currency in today's world. And the reason why it's that way is because let's even go down to the very biological, basis. We're a lot. We're a lot. There's saturation, right? The world is saturated with
Yep.
more humans than it has ever been in
Yep.
decades. Industries are booming. Industries are fracturing uh, into subcategories. And
Yes.
there's just quite a lot of saturation, lots of graduates. The number of people with degrees in 2025 or in 25 will be higher than, the number of graduates in 2024, in 2023. There is globalization, there is an increase in awareness, there's mass awareness. What that means is that
Correct.
what you offer as a professional can be mass produced easily. And we all know what happens to products that can be mass produced, like your
Yes.
sandal or your shoe or your milk or, all these products can be mass produced and then have another brand name just slapped on them. Whatever you think you're offering becomes easily accessible by many other people. What I'm saying in
Correct.
essence is in today's world, a lot of people can offer what you think you can offer in your head. Yeah. So that's where personal branding comes to, give you an edge.
Hmm.
And we're going to go into how that can give you an edge, why
Correct.
it can be unique and memorable for you down the line. But I believe that personal branding is the way to stand out from a highly saturated world. It's a way to sort of, position yourself as more than just another human being. And that is why I always tell people that I don't believe in the term personal branding. Not like I don't believe, sorry, I don't endorse the coinage of that
Hmm.
term. What I actually, use to adopt is persona branding, persona.
Yes.
Persona branding. So nobody send you. Nobody cares about you. You're a human being. There's nothing special about your humanness because we're a lot of human beings, right? With degrees, with skills, with mastery. But what people actually deeply care about is persona. Persona.
Yes.
And we're going to go into the psychology of that down the line, but that will be my answer to that.
I love that so much. You're speaking my language in so many
Mm,
ways because I just remember dissecting who I am, who
mm,
what people perceive when they
mm,
see me, and because of that, there's a certain way that I dress. There's a certain way that I speak. There's a certain way that I approach people, and because of that, a lot of people recognize Elizabeth would not do this or Elizabeth would do this. Somebody said something to me, completely digressing.
mm,
A few months ago, she was going to call me and she texted me first and it was about something. And I said, yeah, you can call me at this time. And when we got on the phone, we talked about it. And I said, you could have just called me. She said, oh, no. You're Miss Professional. I can't just call you anyhow. I know to approach you properly. And that struck a chord with me because this is somebody that I would consider a close acquaintance. And
mm.
for them to think that my time is so valuable, she's like, no,
Yeah.
I know you're always busy and I need to make sure that I put myself in your calendar. I said, whoa, I
Power
didn't
of
know I
brand.
was trying so hard. For the listeners, that's how you curate your persona. You have to ensure that you're not just saying this is who I am. You are being that person. But I'll let the experts talk about it a little bit more. The side B question that I have to this is obviously you talk about the mass production and the mass awareness that people have now. How is personal branding or persona branding different
Hmm.
today than it was 5 years ago? And I'm saying 5 years ago because pre pandemic, I feel like the awareness that we had about things was a little bit different than it is now. People have more of this global awareness of things, and I would say digital awareness of things. TikTok saturated the market post
Hmm.
pandemic or during the pandemic. Instagram, YouTube Shorts, all of these other digital products saturated the market with information post pandemic. So how has persona or personal branding changed now than it was 5 years ago?
Yeah, so a lot of people lost their jobs during the pandemic. And I think it got people thinking about how limited their curriculum vitae, or what you call profile or resume,
Yeah,
how limiting that can be, even your past work experiences. When macroeconomic factors set in, when job security flies out the window, I think the pandemic made people realize how fickle opportunities can be or placements can be. And you already said that there was a sort of digital renaissance, like lots of people started to, as a result of leisure, anyways, people started to engage online. They started to create more
yeah,
accounts, started to reflect their presence online. But there wasn't anything cohesive about that. It was more of a survival tactic. People just wanted to be entertained, to socialize with one another. And what I think is that then influenced professional interactions, because now, especially on LinkedIn, what I noticed, and there's no neat answer to this question. What I noticed on LinkedIn was, for instance, that there were lots of people who had been laid off, who had lost their jobs, people who had businesses in industries that were affected by the pandemic, needed to pivot and start looking for new opportunities. And what I realized was there was now this very intentional, purposeful use of digital platforms to express the need for, either a new job, a new placement, new collaborations, new partnerships, new relationships. And
yeah,
because of that survival instinct, people were pushed to, speak up about what they do. People who would have maybe otherwise found talking about what they do painful, cringeworthy, started to realize that they had no choice about the matter. And they started to put a bit of intentionality behind marketing themselves, expressing their competencies, telling their own stories. In fact, there was a particular post I read. It was an European professional. I've forgotten his industry now. But he had been laid off, and he told this very beautiful story, about the layoff. It was something about him being a family man, and by the time I was done reading, I didn't get the sense that he was even trying to promote himself. But
yeah.
that was what it was, basically. And he was asking for a new job, a new placement, a new offer. But from the lens of, oh, I'm a family man, and for a long time I have defined my worth as somebody who's upholding an infrastructure of people, providing for my kids. And if you see the
Right.
real post, you understand what I'm trying to say. But what I'm trying to say is, I think
I get it.
personal branding has become more, how it's different now is that it's become much more intense. It's become much more digital first, right?
Hmm.
People have begun to realize that it's not only the conferences and where you show up. you know uh,
Mm.
these are not the only hotspots where you can create impressions. You can do them online. You can
Yeah.
transcend geographies, using your TikTok. And I think using great content as a way to express one's persona has become more short form than it was five years ago. It's become more short form and dynamic. Actually, that's what I think. I think
Yeah.
before the pandemic, there was such a reliance on, curated visuals and longer posts. Talk about Facebook, talk about
Yeah.
Instagram. But 5 years in, you now have emerging platforms like Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube Shorts. What I've realized is there's just much more dynamic, short form, content creation. It's more,
Correct.
yeah, and yeah, like these are the trends I've noticed. I don't know if they're a good thing. Maybe attention span has to be catered to. I don't know if people are becoming, again, saturation. Nobody really
Yeah.
send you. Nobody
Yeah.
has time to. Yeah, so it's like even podcasts like this are promoted, with
Right.
short form first than any other thing. So you get snippets, tidbits, and then you push on
You're
TikTok,
interested.
push,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
get people reeled in, and then maybe the long form can then, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. I'm inclined to agree. There's intentional creativity tied into it. Like, people don't just follow or watch videos or watch content based on, okay, it's short, I'm just gonna watch
Mm-hmm.
it. No, they
Mm-hmm.
can swipe up, but you grab their attention with the creativity, with the storytelling of it.
Mm-hmm.
But there has to be intent behind what you've created for me to want to watch it, whether it's short or long.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it speaks to, maybe we'll get to it down the line, what makes your audience stick with
We can talk about it right now, because my next question is actually, how does personal branding differ from having a social media presence?
you. Aha, aha. So a social media presence is what it is, just a presence. It's a presence without meaning is not profitable, right? So you could have presence, but you're not resonating. You're in the room, but nobody really feels you. Nobody is attracted to you. You're not making an impression on anybody. Social media presence is overrated, and impressions should be the goal. Social media presence is a starting point, for persona branding. Some place you can start, but it's really nothing compared to what you should be aiming for. So I'm going to just backtrack a bit to a particular concept that I think is not talked about enough in personal branding, which has everything to do with persona. Actually, it's called archetype, brand archetypes. People don't talk about it enough. When people talk about personal branding, they tell you have a social media account, they tell you highlight your skills, identify your values, which are all good, right? You have to do that somewhere along the line, but all of that should come only after you've identified your own archetype, your brand archetype. Now, brand archetypes have their roots in psychological research as far back as the beginning of Greek mythology. The person who created the concept of archetypes, personas or archetypes, was a man called Carl Jung. Um, but I wouldn't talk so much about him. I'll just talk about what he contributed to, that field, the knowledge he gifted to humanity. What he did basically was he made us realize that human beings have needs and desires. Let's say desires, right? And we're not taught to desire those desires. We just desire them. We're not taught. Nobody teaches you how to desire these things or need them. You just do. And what he did was highlighted, or was able to identify through decades of research, some of these basic primitive needs and desires that help us appeal to human beings. So it's like, when you find yourself drawn to something, it is because that thing actually fulfills one of these very many basic desires, right? And if you pick one of those desires, it will be tied to an archetype or a personality. I'll break it down. I can't recall all of them, but one of those highlighted basic needs are freedom, for instance. Freedom. You're not taught to desire freedom.
Okay.
I'm a new father. I have a 9-month-old daughter, and she's just begun to crawl forward and take baby steps, hold on to things,
Yeah.
and use her 2 legs. And she doesn't, at this point, she doesn't really like it when you station her in one place. It's just like she buckles against anyone's grip right now. Nobody's teaching her, to
That.
want freedom, to loathe restriction. It's just a basic human instinct, right? And this is where it gets interesting now. The need for freedom makes you drawn to anybody who exhibits the archetype of the explorer. There's something else that is fundamental to this concept that Carl Jung
Yeah.
also talked about. He said all these many human needs make us tick, right? But individually, there are certain needs that will make you tick than the others. Certain needs that would ring a louder bell in your head. And he wasn't able to even understand why that is the case. But then again, there's limits to what human beings can understand about ourselves. But
Right.
the truth is, when you put 5 people in a room of all these different needs, different people would consider certain needs higher up in their own hierarchy than
Yeah.
others. So let me try if I can recall some of those other needs. There's freedom, there's innovation, there's safety or security, there's understanding, there's mastery, there is belonging, there is entertainment, yeah, fun. Entertainment, for instance, is tied to the archetype of the jester. So if you're somebody who really, really loves entertainment, it makes
Yeah.
you tick. You hate to be bored. You are most likely going to be drawn to brands, either products or personalities that have the jester archetype.
Yeah.
If you're somebody who loves innovation, you're most likely to be drawn to the archetype of the creator. If you're somebody who likes to have an understanding of things, you You like to know how to, go about things. You'll be drawn to the archetype of the sage. And that, you can read about it. And for me, it's the starting point of persona branding of any sort. And the reason why you have to start from that is because you need to give people one thread to pull. You need to give people one thread to pull. Human beings get confused when you throw so many balls at them. When you throw so many personas at them, they don't remember you. Remember, the essence of personal branding is to make sure that somebody sends you, quote unquote, somebody is able to reckon with you. And that you're memorable, yeah. Because we're a lot of people, there are a lot of Oyins, there are lots of Elizabeths, even from our namings, we're not so special. What makes you special is if over the time you've been able to give people one thread to pull and you've not given them so many dots to connect.
Correct.
Archetypes help you do that. So before you start to say, oh, I want to position myself as a global copywriter who has transitioned from advertising to corporate communications and all those yada, yada, yada. What you should do first is actually figure out what your archetype is. At the end of the day, what is that one thing you want people to know you as, perceive you as? And it's always the best if your archetype is really tied to what you really are inside. You remember when I was introducing myself, I said nobody was going to convince me to do for a living anything that was divorced from who I really am.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's like personal branding to us to start from that. What you want to brand yourself as has to be tied to what you really are. So if you're somebody who likes to have fun and likes to entertain, even if, your profession isn't, say for instance, you're an event planner, but you actually like to entertain, it's one of your most instinctive primary needs. What you need to do is make sure that everything you're doing to position yourself as an effective and competent event planner is done from the lens of the jester. That way you are able to, attract your markets, because that is what people resonate with. Really, it's not about what you can do. It's about who you are.
Correct. Gosh, you've just given me a lesson of a lifetime, because 9 to 5 Blueprint has existed for about 4 years now. And 9 to 5 and everything in between the podcast is an offshoot of that. And up until 2023, I distanced Elizabeth Ajadi from the 9 to 5 Blueprint, even though I was the founder. And I kept getting this feedback. I think at least 5 or 6 people messaged me like, you're the reason we followed the 9 to 5 Blueprint. You are the 9 to 5 Blueprint. And for me, I didn't know how to reconcile both. And I struggled with that greatly until 2023, when I started this series called What Would Elizabeth Do for the 9 to 5 Blueprint. And it's because my cousin always said, oh, when she's thinking about her career and somebody talked to her about something at work, she just thinks, what would Elizabeth do? And it stuck with me for weeks. I was thinking about it. I was meditating on it and trying to think, why did that stick with me? And I said, oh my God, yes. What would Elizabeth do? What would the 9 to 5 Blueprint do? And I started this series and it stuck with people and people liked it. Even people at my 9 to 5 job would say, I saw your video on LinkedIn and I really like it. I like what you said about that. And I said, why have I been punishing myself and distancing myself from the brand? Elizabeth Ajadi is the reason why people want the 9 to 5 Blueprint, not because the 9 to 5 Blueprint is this revolutionary coaching platform. It's because of me, the person behind it. I'm the one they identify with. So yes, lesson of 2025.
What your archetype is? I've studied your brand as well.
I've not studied it, but I personally think it's innovation, but I don't know. I have to go take it.
It could be that, but at the fore of what your brand represents is the need, the basic instinctive need is the need for clarity and understanding. Blueprints, basically itself. Blueprints are for direction, clarity, understanding, and that ties to the archetype of the sage. You're a sage. You're a sage. You're the one people, think about when they're trying to unravel a knot about their career. And you've actually stuck to that over time, even in your naming, in the verbal manifestation of your brand, you're getting it right. It's the 9 to 5 Blueprints. Awesome, perfect. You're not calling it something else. You're not calling it the 9 to 5 fun show, which isn't tied to your sagely brand. That is maybe a jester brand, right? So it's like when I hear 9 to 5 fun show, and then we're having this sort of interesting intellectual conversations that bring understanding. There's just a disconnect you can see, So again, I think we can talk about when we're saying, okay, what are the elements of a strong brand or personal brand? There are elements that have to, come together, but everything has to stem from the archetype.
Yes.
from the culture,
Yes.
the archetype, the identity. Yeah. So
You're schooling me and I'm taking notes right here, but you're so spot on. You're so spot on with that assessment, and I appreciate it. I just want to, you mentioned elements just now, and I
yeah.
want to just touch on that a little bit. In your opinion, what are key elements of a strong personal brand? You've sort of described it with the archetypes,
Yeah.
but when you're talking about, the personal brand, what are key elements I should be looking for, I should be thinking about?
Okay. So I'd say there are lots. I usually would think about four broad elements, with the archetype at the center of these four elements. Yeah. So it's like once you've discovered or you've decided within yourself that you want to combine two archetypes or just stick with one archetype, because you can actually, combine archetypes. You could say you want to be two things to people, but then one becomes primary, the other becomes secondary. In your case, you could say you want to be primarily a sage, a career sage, and then underneath that, be an innovator. Once you've decided that, whether you want to be a rebel, a jester, a creator, a hero, a caregiver, these are the archetypes, by the way. And every strong brand you come across, whether it's a product or a personality, one thing you can always do is align them with any of these archetypes. And it's always one. It's always one. Kanye West, rebel. Vusi Thembe Kwayo, the South African, entrepreneur. Sage.
Mm.
Elizabeth Ajani, sage. Anything you remember anyone for always falls within any of those needs, and they're tied to really our needs. Once you figure that out, that archetype will manifest itself in four broad ways. You have to always remember that. Yeah, it can manifest itself verbally. So your verbal identity has to be tied to your archetype. What you call yourself, what you call your platform, the
Okay.
name you give yourself, the nickname you give to yourself. You could call yourself Ludipe the dragon, and that dragon is there to sort of, just further communicate what your archetype is,
Yeah.
which could be a rebel, any other thing, or hero, or anything. Your verbal
Mm.
identity, your content, your captions online, your stories, how you tell your stories, the tone of voice with which you tell your stories has to be tied to your archetype. You can't determine that you want to be a sage and be sounding like a clown, a jester. You can't do that. Or you can't say you want to be a clown or a jester. And these are comedians, for instance. Anyone wants to, say I'm a comedian and I want to create a brand. You can't then start sounding like a sage. Visual identity, how you dress, how you look, your photos, your videos, whether it's online or offline, have to be aligned with your archetype. You can't say, for instance, that you're a sage, and I'll keep pointing sage as an archetype because it's an archetype
Hmm.
that I try to align with.
Okay.
And I think it's the same for you as well. You
Hmm.
can't say you're a sage, for instance, and then both of us show up here, in the most
Looking on serious.
looking on serious. Yeah, you understand what I mean? Yeah, exactly. So it's like that's not done. Why that wouldn't appeal to everyone? You don't want to appeal to everyone, by the way. If you want to have a brand, you want to appeal to your market,
Correct.
to your own audience, and make sure that you have a connection with them that can be translated into profits. They can
Yeah.
recommend you, they can buy what you're saying, they can buy what you're selling because they're connected with you. These are the kind of people you want to appeal to through your archetypes. There's the visual side to things. The
Yeah.
glasses you wear, for instance, even though this isn't for
Correct.
fun, I actually have, short-sighted, but it also helps in my personal branding
Correct.
as a sage, my afro, my mass of hair. I can't wait to,
It's
grow the
giving
full
Wale
beard.
Soyinka.
Exactly. You with your very perfectly fitted blazer, with a shelf of books just beside you. All of that
Intentional.
is tying into your brand, and it's very intentional. It's highly
Yep.
intentional. You have that element there on lock. Then there are the two other elements, which are not really spoken about, but very important. The third would be who you partner with, your partnerships. Very important
Yes.
as well. It's not just enough to look the part and talk the part. If you're really serious about giving people one thread to pull, you need to look out for who you're found with, the companies you work with,
That is true.
the the people you collaborate with on social media to create content have to be aligned with your brand. For me, for
Hmm.
instance, I can never do anything that is aligned with. I can't do a post collaboration with a comedian, for instance. They are not in my brand world. They are not, in my archetype. So I just
What
wouldn't
are
do
we
it.
jesting about,
What are we
please?
jesting about? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not my
Yeah.
brand.
It's
So
yeah.
it guides me. For instance, working with you, having this conversation with you is a very huge tip.
Perfect alignment.
Yeah, it's a perfect alignment. So I can probably promote this on my LinkedIn because yeah, you share my archetype.
Yeah.
So that's partnerships. Then the very last one, and I'm sure some people say this is just vanity upon vanity, but it's also part of branding. Is what I call your spatial the spatial element, spatial, space.
Okay.
Space. So where you're found, the physical where you're found, basically your ambience, right? Something happened, I think 2 years ago. I was at, I think you could call it a reunion with my university colleagues. Some of those with whom I graduated, so we're having like I can't recall the detail right now. I think it was a friend's wedding. Yes, yes. It was a former colleague's wedding at university, and we're rejoicing. We just finished the ceremony, and some of us were outside taking pictures and just connecting, reconnecting. And there was a particular Ferrari, I think, or Porsche, I'm not sure, a very luxurious modern car, very flamboyantly pimped as well, and looks really good. And people were, Nigerians in their usual fashion. I'm so sorry, Nigerians, I have to cast you here. We're taking pictures with the car, even if it wasn't theirs. I think it's something human beings just do generally. Again,
Yeah.
like belonging as a human need.
Yeah.
So people started to do that, take pictures, and then someone said, "Oyin, please, I don't want to take a picture with the Ferrari." And I remember instinctively just saying, "No, I'm not interested. That's off-brand, actually." And the person couldn't understand what I was saying. Even me, I shocked myself because I'm like, "Wow, is this how much in tune with my archetype I am?" I was really impressed with that instinctive response. I was like, "No, no, no. Oyin is not the person you find taking pictures with a car that obviously isn't ease. That's not what sages do. That's not what sages do. Sages are very, first of all, they're not so materialistic. Materialism is good, but sages are not extremely materialistic. Typically, yeah. So it's like, that's really not my need. So I can't do that. It just doesn't sit right with me. You could tell me to, take a picture beside a statue that means something. You could tell me to take a picture beside a shelf of books. You could tell me to take a picture beside a painting, or some monumental item.
Yeah.
You have me. I will do that. And there are a lot of people who wouldn't do that anyways because their brand isn't the Sagely brand. Do you understand? So it's like, so that's what I mean by the fourth element, which is the spatial element of a brand. It's like you need to watch your space, watch what you know. For instance, you can't say you are. So there are certain archetypes that explore spirituality. The innocent. The innocent is, so when you think of religious leaders, right? You think of people who platform and advocate for chastity, for virginity, for good behaviors generally, forever. The innocent, that's the archetype. You can't be that archetype. You can't say you want to create a personal brand around that archetype. And then you are found doing oble, oble, oble in the club with strippers all around you.
That is so funny.
That's a good analogy of what watching your space does for you. You can't be found doing that. And there is a reason why people instinctively think they shouldn't do that. I can't find a pastor in a bar. You can't,
what
because
are you doing here, sir?
The archetype, the innocent archetype, should not be found in a hedonistic space. So those are the four broad elements which we don't have the time to explore, but you should always have these broad elements in mind. How you talk, how you look, who you work with or partner with, and where you show up.
Awesome. I love that. And you so perfectly broke it down that, like I said, I'm being schooled right now and I love it. And I hope the listeners are also taking notes with me as well. I have so many more questions. I want to talk about more so the application of personal branding. In a way, I feel like you've answered some of these questions, but if you have a different answer, then we can definitely talk about it. We've talked about the spaces that you appear and how you appear. So I want to talk about platforms, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. Do these platforms play a role in what your brand look like and how you appear? Because I definitely appear differently on LinkedIn versus how I appear on my personal Instagram. So I'll explain. When you talked about archetypes, I was thinking, I think I might have two archetypes. There's the sagely archetype of Elizabeth that I'm super serious, I'm getting down to learning, I'm teaching. But then there's also the fun, adventurous Elizabeth. Like, I love to travel. Travel is literally my only biggest hobby. I have other hobbies, but travel is topmost there. And so my personal Instagram is devoted to traveling, exploring, and on my travels, I'm fun and I'm adventurous. I'm nothing like Sage Elizabeth. And so for me, I start to see that I show up differently depending on the platform. do you think that impacts my personal brand overall?
Well, like I said, you can have two archetypes. I mean, nothing in the world, there is no rule in the world that deters products or personalities from having multiple brands.
Right.
So when you think of companies, for instance, who even had lines of brands that are distinct from each other, in fact, sometimes contradictory, think of car brands, for instance. You see a car company that has, made success with, a type of car that they're creating that is made for the masses, everybody. So it's like
That's true.
everybody can access this car. It's a Toyota Corolla, By the way, the Corolla aligns with the archetype of the everyman. That's another archetype, the
Yeah.
everyman. So that's the archetype that appeals to
Mm-hmm.
people's need for a sense of belonging. Like,
Okay.
oh, I want to have a car. I don't have the money, but I want to be seen driving a car.
I
It's
want a
like,
car.
oh, we have this brand for you. Corolla is for everyone. The same car company, Toyota, also has more luxury premium brands, that speak to a different category, a different audience. Brands with a lot. Honda, it's like Lexus to, Toyota.
Yes.
You could also
Yes.
say that as an entity in yourself, you have the right to have multiple brands that appeals
Okay.
to different, audiences, and platforms help you segment the expression of these brands. The way we view platforms is basically dependent on how we as human beings have decided to use
Utilize
this
it.
platform. So
Yeah.
utilize them. Utilization of these platforms over time gives us direction
Yeah.
on how you should be appearing on this platform. So I'm usually not somebody who thinks that, oh, you can't show up on all platforms the same way. What I'm saying is controversial. But I also understand the other argument. I don't say this
Okay.
all the time. What I'm saying is platforms in and of themselves are moral. The utilization of the platforms then give the platforms color and direction and all that. And it can
Correct.
change, over time. So
Yeah.
I'm not always platform conscious or platform specific, but
Okay.
I am utility conscious. It's like, oh, okay, these days TikTok is used to express the more fun side, the more
It's just
relaxed.
vibes.
It's just vibes, so your content shouldn't be very sagely or, creator like. It has to be jester, explorer. But then I have found lots of sagely content on TikTok.
However, the way they present it is different.
I've watched lots of documentaries on TikTok. BBC has an account on TikTok. Do you
Yeah.
think they are doing vibey content? No.
No.
And they have their markets, by the way. Nat Geo Wild, for instance, they don't try, and maybe they should, but then again, I'm not going to fault them because, again, and I hope I'm communicating my
They have
philosophy
their
clearly.
audience.
They have their
You are.
audience. Their persona is a persona on every platform. Maybe you are not
Correct.
aligning with the culture of the platform. But the truth is, I have learned a lot about abstract, mundane stuff like history, archaeology, even on TikTok. It might not be the popular usage of TikTok. It might not be the popular utilization of TikTok. But what I find is that there are communities of content consumers in all platforms whose consumption patterns and behavior negates everything you say about the platform.
The
Do you understand?
platform. Yeah.
On LinkedIn, for instance, do you know there are people on LinkedIn who don't take LinkedIn as seriously as you take LinkedIn, as I take LinkedIn. They're actually,
Apparently, some people use LinkedIn for dating.
yes, thank you so much. There are people who actually I've seen somebody who announced their wedding, their proposal on
I
LinkedIn, not just one,
saw.
but 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. So the expression is really unhinged. Human expression is unhinged by platforms. What we think of
Correct.
platforms, really, we should always remember that it's based on popular usage, and you are free. You are free to subvert that usage. It is a controversial
Correct.
philosophy I have as a content,
But it's
creator.
actually true.
But it's true. So don't think
Yeah.
about platforms. Think about your audiences and how you
Yeah.
want to, what hierarchy you want to give to each archetype that you want to, embody. Think of it like this. I am Elizabeth Ajadi, the sage and the explorer.
Okay.
In the large and grand scheme of things, barren platforms, which archetype and persona do I actually want to overshadow the other? That's how I should think about it, because attention is finite. Which persona do I want people paying more attention to? And you have
It's
to have like your
definitely
clear
the
objectives.
sage.
It's definitely so you have your personal goals and objectives. What you just need to do really is make sure that you are feeding that archetype than the other archetype. It's as simple as that. So you can then decide to say, okay, if I want, so I use 6 platforms in general, 6 online
Okay.
platforms to express my brand. If I want the Sage to overshadow the Explorer, I don't want to make sure that I am utilizing 3 platforms, each for each archetype. That is a no-go area. What you want to do is make sure that at least 4 platforms, with 4 platforms, you're channeling the sage, and
Okay.
then the other 2 platforms, and it doesn't matter what I'm sorry. What I'm saying is counterculture, is counter industry. I think I'll be stabbed for this in the streets for the
Yeah.
industry, but I don't care. It's the truth. I've
Yeah.
seen unpopular usages of platforms, and you can decide that on Facebook you want to, it's like you want to build a community on Facebook that most people don't, would rather not build a community. But you'll still find communities there because human beings are human beings, whether they're using TikTok, whether they're using
Or not.
Snapchat, whether
Correct.
I am the same sage who's using TikTok. And if I see sagely content on TikTok, guess what?
You
I
would
will
consume it.
I will consume it. And there are many other people like me who are consuming it. Then again, this
Agree.
personal branding we're talking about, we're not talking about corporate or product branding. That aspect of branding is much more structured. So you cannot
Yes.
speak like this. I will not speak like this when it comes to product. It's like, you can't mess with people's corporate entities margins by having weird
Right.
philosophies like this. You need
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
able to
Be
prove
focused.
the ROI of
Yeah.
platforms and forecast ROI. Yeah. But when it comes to your own person, your personal entity, no. Feel free to think free about
Okay.
platforms. So yeah, that's the point.
Awesome. We have a lot of listeners that are in typical 9 to 5 roles. Even I am in a typical 9 to 5 role. A curious question that I always had is how do you adapt your brand as your career evolves, as you're moving up the corporate ladder?
We all grow up sooner or later. Our entity itself, the physical entity changes. But usually I'm tempted to say that the brand doesn't. Right? It's like the very definition of a brand is its consistency,
Okay.
its lasting identity. It's like I said, that one thread that continues to get pulled through and through. But then I'm not going to be rigid to say that don't change your brand, don't evolve your brand. At a point, evolving your brand has to happen. And I'm going to put a bit of structure to my understanding of when that should take place. So when you start your career, you're entry level, you're an intern, junior, executive, or you're just an associate. You can't at that point, for instance, try to position yourself as a sage because you're only just learning, the ropes of your craft. It's only just common sense. You've not even paid your dues. You've not learned the ropes. You're still under tutelage. I know a particular copywriter who I once supervised at BBDO. He emigrated to Canada and he started this particular platform. And this is not an endorsement or an advertisement, for his platform. And that platform is dedicated to helping young advertising executives find a voice. And so he's built his personal brand. His name is Eyimofe Okuwoga. And I don't know if he has a structured understanding of what he's currently doing, but what he's doing is a very perfect example of the kind of brand you should be creating as an entry-level professional. It's like in your first 3 to 4 years, what you're doing is pursuing connection. And so the brand that you should build has to be aligned with archetypes that pursue connection, such as the everyman, for instance. So Eyimofe is coming to say, if you think of me, think of the person who platforms the underrepresented needs of juniors in workplaces, in advertising. So he hosts conferences that do the opposite of what conferences do, which is platform the opinions of younger people who don't yet have the experience. So it's like the underdog archetype. Do you understand? So the perfect brand you should push out, the archetype should be the underdog archetype, the everyman archetype. Archetypes that pursue connection would resonate on your level as when you're starting out your career. Which brings me to the second group of archetypes. There are a set of archetypes that provide structure. That's what they do. According to Carl Jung, these are not my words, by the way. They provide structure. So it only makes sense because if you've pursued connection and now I'm weaving a tale, like you started your career, you've pursued connection, you've learned the ropes, you understood what it means to be an underdog and all that. At some point, you become, a master, if you could say so. At that point, you should evolve your brand archetype into archetypes that provide structure. You should stop being an everyman, stop being an underdog, and really intentionally start to, and I'll give you examples of archetypes that provide structure. One of it is the sage, for instance, that provides understanding. There's another archetype that provides structure, and that's the creator, and that's tied to the human need for innovation. But when they think of you, do you want to be the creator? You need to, or you want to be the ruler? That's another archetype that ties to the need for control. So it's feminists, for instance, fall under this archetype. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. whom I love so much, by the way. At some point, let me just say this, I digress. At some point, one of my passwords used to be Chimamanda's name. With a couple of other numbers and
Other
symbols. Yeah,
elements.
that's how much I love the woman, and that's because I'm not a woman, but I have lots of women around me, and I even have a daughter right now. And what an archetype does is try to establish control. So it's like the ruler archetype is tied to the need for control. So if the narrative is that women have not had control over their lives for a
Right.
very long, considerable span of time, if you then show up as the person who tries to put control back into the hands of certain people who no longer have control, whose
Mm,
control has been stolen from them, you are the ruler. That's your archetype, right?
mm,
And what you're doing is providing structure, basically. So even as a career person, as a professional, if you identify a gap in your market or in your industry where you've spotted a marginalized group of people, say black people, for instance, in the USA, are not well represented in advertising agencies. And I know a couple of ruler archetypes, personalities on LinkedIn who champion this. It's like my goal, really, when you think of me, I want to be the champion of inclusion for black people in
Black eye.
creative sectors
Yeah.
abroad.
Yeah.
That's the ruler archetype, bringing control back. So you need to evolve. Once you get power, you become mid-level, you become a senior,
Yeah.
that's how you think of evolving your brand. Your
Yeah.
obsession now stops being about pursuing connection and providing structure to people who are still pursuing connection. So you become a big brother
Yeah.
in some sense. That's how to
Yeah.
think about it. The third group of archetypes do something called explore spirituality. I don't know how this might fit into your professional journey, but I don't think it's that relevant. It's like, of all the archetype groups, this isn't professional at all. This is highly
Okay.
personal. If you're somebody who takes courses seriously beyond the professional world,
Hmm.
religion, environment, and all of that, these archetypes are good for you. You can, if you feel like you've come into your own and these courses are beginning to ring a bell in your head. That
Yeah.
need, you can evolve your brand or you could create parallel brands that help you explore that spirituality. And one of them is, like I said, the innocent. If at some point in your life you start to, to find God, to find spirituality, to find whatever it is, whether it's animism or deity worship or monotheism, whatever it is, you can consider building brands in that
That's
in
parallel.
that in that in that yeah in that regard. And under exploring spirituality, you also have the explorer, by the way, because according to Carl Jung, freedom itself, the human thirst for freedom, is spiritual. You could say, for instance, your traveling side falls under the archetype that actually explores spirituality. Because what you're trying to do is transcend your physical boundaries. You're trying to enter new cultures, enter new spaces that just basically, it's spiritual, actually. That's what it is. Spiritual is not just
I'm
about
just
going to
like,
church.
yep, completely. Yep. That's
Yeah.
literally
So,
what I go for when I'm
yeah.
traveling. I want to
So,
connect.
connect, yeah, on a spiritual level with other planes of realities.
Yeah.
But that has nothing to do with your professional side anyway. So
Yeah.
the fourth archetype, which is like I think the final bus stop of how you can evolve your brand from entry level to mid-level senior to, you know oh, you are now a patron, you have retired, you're an emeritus professional, you're in your 60s, 70s, you've seen it all, you've done it all. And what you have to offer now is, the advice of old men and old women. Those are archetypes that leave a legacy, according to Carl Jung.
Mm.
Archetypes that leave a legacy. So beyond providing structure, at some point you need to stop providing structure and leave that for those who are still agile and just new into, the seniority stage.
Mm.
Archetypes that leave a legacy are the heroes, the hero archetype. It's tied to the need for
Okay.
mastery and experience. And all of these archetypes, when you read about them, when you read what they entail, how they look, how they sound, where they're found, examples, it would instantly give you a clear picture of the kind of brand you want to create and the kind of brand you want to sort of evolve into. I'll give you an example of one of the archetypes that leave a legacy in person, in flesh, would be Wole Soyinka. These are personalities who 80% of their activities, their storytelling, their obsessions, where they are found, what they do, isn't really about providing structure anymore. It's not about leaving a legacy. Creating systems and platforms, giving insights and advice that will shape the future of a generation. You should be championing causes. You should be the philanthropist. You should be the
Yeah.
one opening
Yeah.
institutes. You
Passing
should
the
be the one.
baton.
Yeah. So that's just a very common sense, structured way to understand how people should evolve their brands, as they grow in their career.
So, in summary, go from being the underdog to becoming more structured to then attaining a higher level of spirituality, which in professional setting could be subject matter expertise that goes beyond just knowing about it, but deeper knowledge, and then legacy. You're starting to pay it forward, passing the baton to the next generation of leaders to be able to grow and continue to evolve. Have one curious question. When we think about personal branding and branding that successfully hit the nail on the head in 2024, whether it's personality or brand, who or what brand comes to mind for you?
Very easy for me. Vusi Tembekwayo. I don't know any other personality that has successfully entrenched their brand archetype, the sage brand archetype, as
Okay.
much as him. Vusi is a South African author, entrepreneur, businessman. He owns his company. You would have seen this video. You just would not know he's Vusi, but he's the very eloquent South African man who's always talking about Africa and business and how to express yourself and how to articulate what you do. For me in 2024, it was like the most resounding and memorable persona in my space. Anyways, he's always writing structure, talking to people
Yeah.
about how they can sell themselves better, how they can,
Yes.
what are the loopholes in our thinking as African. I think this year was the year where he consolidated that persona. At the end of the day, how people perceive him is the sage, is the leader. Vusi Tembekwayo is an impressive example of persona branding, not just personal branding, not just. And I'm creating a distinction between the two because you have a lot of personal brands out there, but they are not tied to any archetype. What that just tells you is that they are not memorable. That's what you consider suicide in advertising. It's to not be memorable, to not be differentiated. For products, it's Apple. It's always going to be Apple. Apple in 2024 became the first $1 trillion brand in the world. 24, the first ever $1 trillion brand in valuation. Despite all the market uncertainties, despite all the setbacks the products faced, in 2024, the brand remained solid,
well recognized,
profitable. Like people bought into the brand despite the issues, and they became worth trillions of dollars. Do you know what that means? First of all, it means they've been very consistent. They've meant one thing and one thing for decades.
Yes.
They've been the creator, innovation.
Yes.
When you think innovation, Apple.
It's Apple.
It's Apple. Like it's Apple. So they've maintained that they've not drifted from innovation to freedom or or intimacy. They don't care about it. They just care about one need, human need, which is innovation, and they've stuck to it. They're not talking about they might talk about safety and security, but it's always from the lens of innovation. Always from the lens of innovation. They are very aware of the archetype and they've stuck to it and see the results. It's the same way the Nike archetype is the hero, actually. I think it's the hero. I might be mistaken, but I think it's the hero. It's all about, leaving a legacy, about doing something that transcends you, about doing more than yourself, about being remembered, about being the best at what you're doing, leaving a legacy. They are the hero. And so when you wear a Nike shoe, when you buy into the Nike brand, what you're basically telling people around you without you telling them is that legacy appeals to you.
Final question. We're recording this at the start of a new year, and it's a time for people to start thinking about how they want to show up in the new year. Do you have any thoughts or advice to our audience, our listeners, on how they should approach showing up in 2025? And as a part B to that, how you think branding will change in the next few years, which impacts how people would show up.
So when you look at the trends of the past half decade, because 2025 is actually the beginning of the second half of the 2020s. Think of it that way, right? So
yes, actually.
So you see AI being the biggest story, so we cannot avoid that conversation, right? My advice would be for people to start to see how they can leverage artificial intelligence to aggressively push their persona. For those of us who are already early adopters of artificial intelligence, maybe what you want to start doing right now is prompting ChatGPT, Jasper, or any of those solid generative platforms. Start having conversations with your AI platforms about your archetype. Based on my interaction so far with you, ChatGPT, what do you think my archetype is? And how do you think I can push this? Start from there. And I like to be single-minded about everything I say because, again, it's the only way to be memorable. For anyone to remember the conversation we're having is to drill it down to just one thing, which is archetypes. So see how AI can help you have a deeper understanding of your own archetype and how you can push it. Don't be intimidated by AI. Be experimental with it. There's nothing I can say right now in the span of another couple few minutes that would,
Yeah.
that will be as pivotal or, paradigm shifting as what I just said. Also, what I've realized is as we go into, the next half of this decade, there seems to be an emergence of contradictory forces. So it's almost like when you have a movement, what usually tends to happen is that that movement triggers a counter movement. So when it's like fashion, for instance, if you see a wave of minimalism, what usually tends to happen sooner than later is that there is always a counter wave of maximalism.
Maximalism.
Do you understand? Yeah, it's the way we are wired as human beings. It's the same thing with AI, right? Very soon, there's going to be, I believe, and from research and wide readings, indications are that there is going to be a huge rise in appreciation for, human-centered, outputs,
Yeah.
human-centered people, human-centered interactions that have nothing to do with generative technology at all. So it's like as technology becomes the bigger story, very soon humanity would, become the next bigger story. What that means
Correct.
is you need to position yourself as somebody who understands the humanity behind the
These
technology.
technologies.
That's very important because very soon the need for human connection is going to rise. It's the same with the pandemic, for instance. The pandemic ushered in a movement of isolation, although it was forced down our truth, but that was
Yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
unintended movement. What happened was that it created a counter movement of socialization. Once, the lockdown was over, brands started to take physical experiences more seriously. Brands who didn't used to do experiences before started to do it on ground experiences. Retail started to, to be more focused on IRL, in real life experiences at
Right.
stalls. There were a lot more physical activations. That's how it's going to be. Like, so if you're somebody who has only been expressing, his or her persona online, yeah, it's the age of the online. But guess what? A new counter age is coming, which is the
Yeah.
outside. You need,
We're
and which is one of the
outside.
goals I have actually. I want to start to express my persona more offline than online. It's something I've been, thinking about. The four other elements to talk about, the two other elements, which is my spatial, the spatial
Right.
element of my brand, the spaces, the conferences. I want to actually start to show up physically, in spaces that are befitting of a sage. I also want to do the same thing I want to connect more with people. I want to do more things like this, for instance, speaking with another
Yeah.
human being in my archetype. I think it's very necessary that I start doing that, not just because I just felt, oh wow, I need to start. No, it's because I sense a counter movement coming. One that elevates humanity over technology, one that
Yes.
elevates connection over automation, So that would be my advice to people. Leverage AI to understand your archetype better and how to
Okay.
push it, and then be more holistic in the expression of your brand. Don't just have a social media presence. Don't just use social media. Consider the two other broad elements of your brand, your spaces, and your partnerships. So, and it's all tied to connection and humanity. So I
Yeah.
hope that was clear.
It covers it.
Okay.
It was very clear. It was in plain English. It's be more holistic about the
Yeah.
expression of your brand. Go out there, push yourself, push who you are. Don't shoot darts and hope that something's going to catch. Be very specific, just speaking in layman terms, specific about how you position yourself, how you show up online and in person. Connect more with people.
People.
Yes, yes, yes. The people element of it, I think we've been missing it a little bit in the last few years, but people definitely crave it more. My cousin and I, we host a monthly event that we call Cleveland Connect. It's ticketed. They buy ticket and we plan events. We feed them. We do something together. We painted together. We paired people together. We're doing a vision boarding event together. And the goal is to put ourselves, our brand. She has a catering business. I have the coaching business, to put ourselves in front of people to connect with them, but also help them be better versions of themselves while we are expressing just who we are.
Yeah.
So I definitely resonate with that a great deal. And I do have chats with Gemini. I've had long conversations with Gemini, like, what do you think? I'm applying for this job. And Gemini goes, well, based on our previous interactions, I think XYZ. It's so funny.
Useful tool.
And it would be interesting the things that you find out that AI is learning about you and the insights AI can give back to you. You still have to do the work, obviously, but leverage the technologies that are there, but also leverage the human beings around you as well, the communities.
You summarized it perfectly summarized.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the sage in me.
Mm.
um, that's all we have on personal branding. I wish you all a very amazing 2025, and I hope that you are going to be leveraging what we've discussed today. It's a long conversation, very, very helpful. So much to take away from today's conversation about personal branding. Read more about brand archetypes, learn about your archetype, and start to position yourself in your archetype and connect with people in your archetype to explore more of how you can be a better version, perhaps even somebody that has positioned themselves well in their archetype, to learn more how you should be doing or positioning yourself online and offline. I want to say a very huge thank you to Oyin Oludipe, our guest today, for sharing amazing insights on personal or persona branding. I'm sure our listeners are very appreciative of the gems that you've dropped. I certainly am appreciative of the gems that you dropped today. I'm going to leave you guys with this words. You are the architect of your journey. So be who you are, be what you want to be, and just go for it. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and you will find the visual on YouTube at The 9 to 5 Blueprint. Our website has all the information, www.the9to5blueprint.com, and we post weekly on Fridays, and we will be wrapping up season 1 very soon. But go back and listen to all the previous episodes and follow us on all the platforms. Thank you. See you on the next one. Bye.